Right.
Well, everyone, welcome today. This is such an exciting day because we are talking to Nick and Sheryl, who are a powerhouse couple that Jules and I have been inspired by from the sort of beginning of our talks in modern slavery and wanting to fight this cause. And you two wrote this book called Half the Sky, which honestly, Jules, you seem to think our mum gave it to my mum.
I think your mum gave us both a copy when we were about 21 years old, and it was after we'd been to India to visit a safe house, and the first time we learned about human trafficking. And this book really spurred us on and inspired us to set up the Anti-Slavery Collective. So this is a big fangirl moment for Eugenie and I. So yeah. Thank you. Thank you for
all you do.
Yes, absolutely. You set up an organization to make change, and that's terrific.
Oh, well,
so we're here today because we want to celebrate World Against Trafficking in Persons Day. I always get that name wrong. And first question to you both is, what inspired you to write the book Half the Sky and to focus on the oppression of women in the developing world?
Well, it actually has its seeds in China, believe it or not. So we were foreign correspondents based in China. And, China is full of lots of good, lots of evil. I mean, it's just, this very complicated mesh. And we were writing about women and girls. There's actually a phrase called the abduction and sale of women. And it was the frightening prospect. But it basically was about how women were stolen, kidnapped from one part of China and then sold to another part. And we thought, okay, well, China is such a complex place. It's just China. This is just China. This happens only in China. And then we came back to the US. Nick started traveling around the world as a columnist and started going to Africa and saw similar things as well. We realized this may be a global phenomenon. And that became Half the Sky, the book.
Yeah, I would just add that one experience that really did steer me was the trip to Cambodia that Sheryl mentioned. And when you see a group of young girls who are being held and auctioned off for their virginity, you don't forget that, and it haunts you. And in particular, there were two girls who I spent an afternoon with in a brothel, and one had been sold by her stepfather, the other at 15, and the other, at 14, I'm sorry, and the other had been kidnapped by a neighbor at 15 and sold to that brothel. And they were locked up there. And the 15-year-old told me how when she went missing, her mother had searched all over Cambodia to try to find her. And when your daughter goes missing in Cambodia, you look in the red light districts. And a week before I got there, the mother had found her in that brothel, and they'd had this joyous reunion. And I asked, well, so why are you still here? And the girl explained to me that the brothel owner said that the brothel had paid good money for this girl, and the mother would have to buy her back. And the mother didn't have the money. And I just couldn't believe this was happening. And this felt just like 19th century slavery, except these girls are going to be dead of AIDS by the early 20s.
And in China, so there was an author of a book about this whole phenomenon that we spoke to. And on the cover of the book, he's got this very scary photo of these forlorn looking young girls. They had to be in their teens, maybe late teens at the oldest. And they were all wearing these placards. And the placards just had the price of them for sale. It was unbelievable. It was like, 250 yuan or 100 yuan. I mean, unbelievable.
But in Cambodia, actually, I did something unusual for a journalist that raised a lot of eyebrows and hackles too. In 2003, I ended up buying two girls from the brothels that they were in, and to take them back to their families to prove that you can take title to a human being. And I paid $150 for one and about $300 for the other. And there's something very sobering when you get a written receipt for buying a human being.
I totally agree. I don't even know what that would be like. But I think something you just mentioned was that once you see it, you can't unsee it. And I think that's one of the main things that Jules and I have found, but also lots of people we've spoken to in this field. It's always, once you see it, you can't unsee it. For our listeners, could you just explain who you were writing for, who you write for as well, but also I love why you named Half the Sky, and I want you to tell our listeners.
Well, we were correspondents for the New York Times, New York-based newspaper, and the interesting thing about Half the Sky is that it comes from a saying that we mention in our book, China Wakes, and it basically says, "Women hold up half the sky."
One of the reasons we wanted to choose that is that we wanted to underscore that, the plight of women around the world is not just a terrible tragedy, it's also a real opportunity. There's a real chance for uplift. And there's something exhilarating about traveling around and seeing girls getting educated for the first time and women getting micro savings access and starting businesses and the impact that has on their families, on their communities.
I think Jules and I, another thing that we constantly talk about is the role that media plays with amplifying the voices of the lost. And that's something that's so fantastic that your New York Times journalist written a book. We've heard about it. So many people have read it, and you're using your positions to create massive change. And I think that's something we always want to inspire people with. So, I mean, that's not a question. It's just a kind of observation and a thank you. But
it's so true. It's like using a platform to shine a light on what's going on. And that's what we aspire to do at the Anti-Slavery Collective. And that's 100% what you guys have done.
So one of the questions that we've got to ask is, we can only imagine that the sheer amount of atrocities that you've witnessed is, and you were mentioning some, like when girls have, prices around their neck. But in terms of women and girls being subjected to modern slavery and trafficking, what was one of the most shocking things that you've seen on your travels? I know that you've mentioned a couple of things, but we'd love to hear a few anecdotes that maybe end with a positive story.
I mentioned, Cambodia, where we'd seen these girls auctioned off for their virginity. And I mentioned the two girls that I bought. So it was a complicated story. One of the two girls turned out to be addicted to meth. And so she was joyously reunited with her family. She hadn't seen them for 5 years. But then a few days later, she ran back to the brothel because the brothel would provide her that meth. And it was a way of controlling her. And we didn't think that we thought that was it. And I went back and visited her several times and I thought, sorry, Mom, you're just going to end up dying in the brothel. But because of the work of activists, because of the work of diplomats and of journalists, there was more pressure on the Cambodian government to clean up its act. And it wasn't that they closed up the brothels or locked up traffickers, but the pressure meant that the police officers asked more in bribes to keep that brothel open. And so for that trafficker running that brothel, she was a businesswoman running that brothel. And she just found that once she had to pay about $5 a day in bribes, it was no longer worth it. So she closed down the brothel, freed the girls, and opened up a grocery store. And this was not justice. I mean, she had destroyed I don't know how many lives. She never paid for that, but it did mean that those girls in there, including Stray Mom, were free. It's a complicated story, but it does underscore to me that we do have leverage, not to make things perfect, but to make things better.
All the stories, we remember the stories of Neth, we remember the stories of Mina. Which to you both has the most impact in terms of an uplifting end and perhaps a sort of a happy ending that you never saw?
Maybe Ernie Basu, maybe.
Oh, okay.
There's an incredible woman in Calcutta who we visited a number of times in Calcutta, India, in actually not far from Mother Teresa's old base, right by the river in a red light district. And this woman, Ermi Basu, has worked to educate those women in that red light district, and especially to educate their children and offer them ways out. And it's been extraordinary to witness over the years. And one of those children ended up going to law school, another went to medical school. And it's a reminder to us of the adage that talent is universal, but opportunity is not. And, at the end of the day, many of the women who are working in brothels, like Stray Mom, are deeply traumatized. They're deeply stigmatized. It's hard for them to start over. We should work with them, but we above all should try to help their children to try to break that cycle of intergenerational poverty and enslavement that happens in so much of the world.
In Half the Sky, something that I loved is that you're always giving solutions. You're giving solutions to individuals, you're giving examples of schools, and I think Oakland, was it called Oakland? The school in America that's connected to the one in Cambodia. And I think one of the things, like, obviously you've mentioned just then that the subject is huge and it's very sort of interconnected and difficult to process. How would you give advice to people, individuals wanting to end modern slavery and trafficking, or groups? I mean, you've done it so well and eloquently in your book. What's your best advice for everyone out there?
Well, I think that, first of all, it is almost nearly everywhere. I mean, it's in many more places than you ever imagined. And in fact, after we wrote Half the Sky, which we had focused mainly overseas, people were saying this is going on in the US as well. And I would imagine it's going on in the UK and in Europe. So it's just more hidden, and it's basically pimps, using all sorts of techniques and manipulation to reel in a girl and basically have her basically prostitute for him. So it takes it somewhat different format, but it is similarly this sense of slavery that the woman feels. So, I do think that it is more pervasive. And so that means there are a lot of organizations like yourself that are really trying to, stamp out, if not in the local areas, but also globally. And so I would urge people to basically, choose a group that you care about, that you can feel comfortable, with the people and the organizers, and then just get involved.
Totally. And Sheryl, what you said earlier about kind of finding the passion, finding the cause, it's totally what we encourage at the Anti-Slavery Collective. We always say to people, find a passion that really resonates with you and go for it. And something that Eugenie and I feel incredibly lucky about is that we are two best friends who love each other, doing something we love, and we get to do that together. And it means that you can spur each other on in difficult times or overwhelming times. And you guys as a married couple must have that similar bond. And I'd love to hear your comments and thoughts on what it's like to tackle such a big problem, but with your favorite person.
Well, for us, writing, we're sort of book writers. We were writing the books. We don't have an organization the way you two do. So we're not actually, out in the field doing the actual combating. No, actually.
I think you are.
But partly because we now are I've left journalism, so we're in different professions. So, these book projects really do help us bring back, come together again to work on a project together, because we are often our different worlds, and it gets so busy that this really does help. But also I think that this is the kind of topic, whether it's anti-trafficking and slavery, some of the other issues we write about in Half the Sky. The one thing is that it's such a compelling and devastating phenomenon that you can't not help yourself but want to help and want to do something about it, because it's such an injustice that you think, my goodness, how and we should be able to solve this in this day and age. So I think that it really does pull people in. Even if you're not doing it 24 hours a day, you sort of want to feel that you have some hand in it to play a role in making it better.
One reason why we also wanted to address this as a couple together is that there's something to be said for a man and a woman addressing women's rights issues together. And there is perennially a problem with women's rights issues being marginalized as a women's issue, as some kind of peripheral issue on the side. And, at the end of the day, civil rights in the US weren't an African-American issue. LGBT issues weren't just a gay issue. The Holocaust wasn't a Jewish issue. And when you have women and girls being kidnapped and enslaved around the world, that's not just some peripheral women's rights issue, a human rights issue that challenges all of us and should gnaw at our collective conscience.
Yeah, you're totally right. And I think that's something in your book that it brings it to the level of, on everyone's level, it's every person's thing to have to do. And in your view, I mean, do you think that there's a brighter outlook for women and girls? And you think people are listening much more?
Oh, absolutely. So for instance, when we came out with the book, this was, a while back, I think it was just beginning to gain currency. But now it's almost accepted as though this is something that, one has to fight for. And I think that that's with us now. And so it's a matter of just us continuing to deploy the force and the political will to keep pushing, because it is going to take a while. I mean, the pandemic, I think, has set everything back, because everybody's so focused inward, and they don't have all of their philanthropic dollars, all of their mind share is going towards just survival and taking care of their own family and friends. And so we totally get that. But hopefully, there still will be some space and time left over for things like anti-slavery.
Yeah, I just think the transformation has been enormous. And when I started as a journalist, a majority of women throughout history had always been illiterate. Now there are as many girls as boys in elementary schools around the world. There's still a gap in middle school and in high school, but in terms of basic literacy, we've made huge strides. And that really makes such a difference in opportunity to get into business, to make money, to understand how the law can help you. I remember in a Nepali girl who was trafficked into India, and she only had a modest education, maybe 6th grade or something. But the traffickers were used to these completely illiterate girls. And because this girl had, maybe a 6th grade education, she knew that what was being done to her was wrong. She knew this was against the law. She fought back, and she was taken to Calcutta. She was locked up in a room. A customer left a cell phone there, and she used the phone to call her relatives in Nepal. And she said, I don't know where I am. I think I'm in India, but I'm locked up. And, and the police were able to eventually locate her and rescue her. And that in some ways was a product of education. Education, I think, is the best leverage we have to change the world. And it's educated girls in particular who are the change makers.
Yes.
Great.
Yep.
And for two movers and shakers like you who never seem to sit still, can you tell us what's next and tell us a bit about the backdrop behind you?
Yes, well, that's Tightrope. So this book actually came out in January 2020, right before the pandemic. But it is basically about some of the issues that came to the fore during the pandemic, which is that it's about the struggles of the working class. And the backdrop is the growing gap between the rich and the poor, and what's happening to the working class people, because if we don't, all across the developed world, if we don't actually take care to really elevate the working class, we're going to have a harder time competing on the global stage, because all of our countries are much smaller than China and India. And so we need every little person power that's possible. And so we write about, it's anchored in Nick's hometown of Yamhill, Oregon. And he follows, I'll let him tell you a little bit about how we did it, but we do write about people across the country as well, that it's a phenomenon that is really pretty widespread about how difficult it is for them to get through life. So life for many of them is like walking on a tightrope, and there's no net underneath. And so one stumble and you fall all the way down, whether it's into drugs, alcohol, or suicide. Even before the pandemic, there was some interesting data from the census that showed that basically for 3 years in a row, life expectancy had been falling, which hadn't happened since the previous pandemic in 1918. And so this was really dramatic. And now, of course, the pandemic is, made it the fourth year, of course, and the the life expectancy has dropped by a year and a half about. So a lot of it is because of people in the working class, the middle-aged working class, and mostly white people in at least the US. I don't know what it's like in the UK or Europe. And Europe doesn't have the problems to the degree that the US has. But you can see the challenges that we have. You want to talk about your hometown?
Yeah, so my little farm town used to be dependent on timber, light manufacturing, and agriculture. Those jobs went away. A third of the kids on my old school bus are now dead from drugs, alcohol, and suicide. So a third. We were very proud of our social fabric. We were very proud of our strong rural values. They unraveled pretty quickly when those jobs went away. And the kids there were 5 kids who got on the bus right after me each morning from the same family. The eldest died of hepatitis from drug use, from liver failure. The next one died in a house fire when he was passed out drunk. The third blew himself up cooking meth. The girl died of disease from IV drug use, and the baby died just as the pandemic began of an overdose. And these are 5 smart, talented kids who had so much to offer. We spent so much money incarcerating those kids rather than investing in their education, in their job training. And so that's why we wrote the latest book, Tightrope. It's an international issue, although particularly so in the US. And the last element of it is that partly because we were very shaped by that reporting, I've been wondering how to help. So if you ask what's next, I'm exploring the possibility of running for governor of Oregon on leave from the New York Times. And
Wow.
We're thinking about this. It's only a conversation for the 2 of us, and we're thinking about it. Stay tuned.
Oh my
Well,
God, that's amazing.
Yeah, talk about silver lining and light at the end of the tunnel, and ending a story like that with hope. And obviously this book is for that family, and what an amazing tribute.
And also, one of the things in Half the Sky that really stuck with Jules and I is the parable that Nak and Nathaniel told you about the washed up starfish, and how a man went up to this boy throwing starfish back into the ocean, and he was like, "You'll never make a difference, there's too many starfish." And he said, "Well, it made a difference to that one starfish I just threw back." So, I mean, you guys are starfish, or no, you guys are the boys. And you're helping. Yeah, you're putting all the starfish back in the sea. But I think you're pretty awesome. Jules and I have had fangirls about you, as we told you at the beginning. So thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you.
Thanks for the conversation, and thanks for what you're doing. And
keep it up.